Jim, you're an absolute legend. Like, you've helped so many people throughout the years with great advice. So I really want to thank you for stopping by the show.
Well, Ellen, to that comment, and thank you. When I was young, a lot of people helped me, went out of their way, and I figured, well, I should do the same. Why don't I return some of it? I don't have anything to sell, so if I can help, I would like to give them some time and effort, and maybe I will help somebody. Maybe I won't. Maybe I will ruin somebody, but I would like to try.
No, you definitely helped me so much. So just again, so grateful
Thank
for
you.
that. So I just want to start with kind of like what, in my opinion, is the most important question because it kind of sets the stage for a lot of big investing decisions. And it's, there are two camps. One camp thinks that America, the United States, is headed for a hyperinflationary event like Zimbabwe and the Weimar Republic. And therefore, you just have to pile into gold and silver and watch it skyrocket. Another camp thinks that we're going to be like the British Empire, right? Which has devalued its currency over the last 2,000 years. And they're still standing and seem relatively okay. Where do you think America is headed?
Both, both of the above. I don't think we're Zimbabwe yet. I've made small investments in Zimbabwe recently, as a matter of fact. But history shows, Elliot, well, first of all, history shows that no country stayed on top forever. 100, 200 years is the max, and then they peak and go into decline. So I presume we're no different from anybody else. But one of the problems with history is people don't learn the lessons of history. We had a president recently who didn't know history, or if he did know history, he said he was smarter than history. I know I'm not smarter than history, and history is very clear. No nation and no currency, by the way, because they sometimes go hand in hand, has stayed on top forever. So America is now the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. We have troops in over 100 countries. There are people who would say that we're overextended financially, economically, militarily, and it looks like they might be right. So yes, no, I worry. It's not a good time to be young in America because what the young people are going to inherit is mind-boggling. I've got two teenage kids, and it disturbs me. It's good to be old because I don't have to pay. I don't have to pay for all of this. I get the benefits. They're borrowing a lot of money, spending a lot of money. Pretty well. I'm old. Okay, do it. It helps me, but it doesn't help the future. 100 years ago, Britain was the richest, most powerful country in the world. There was no number two. 50 years later, they were bankrupt. Literally, the IMF had to fly into Heathrow to bail them out. So it can happen. It has happened. It often happens. And the symptoms, the money printing, the debt, et cetera, have always led to the kind of problems you're talking about. I don't think it'll happen in 2001 or 2021 or even 2022, but it's on the way.
Yeah, that's really interesting because just thinking about what the investment implications are of this kind of event happening, because like Great Britain, if you had bought their stock market during World War II, you would have made an absolute fortune because I think it just went straight up from then. So it's like, how bad will it get essentially in America if devaluing the currency seems to be everyone's go-to move?
If you buy just about any country in the middle of a war, it goes straight up. Even if you bought Japan, if you were careful, you still came out making a lot of money, or Germany, even though both countries were destroyed. One of the things I have learned is if you buy in a catastrophe, you often make a lot of money. So I'm not advocating that we have a war so that we can all buy in wartime or anything. But your point is good. Yes, Britain was great. But the people who stayed in Britain didn't have a great life. Their standard of living compared to what it was before, it was not the same country. It's not the same world. It was amazing. I mean, I was actually a student in England in some of those years, and there were exchange controls. I can remember 20 years after the war, there were still sites in London that were known as bomb sites where the Germans had dropped bombs. 20 years later, they still hadn't cleaned them up. They didn't have any money, So the standard of living was not great. You couldn't take money out of the country. I mean, it was a mess. But that had been the richest country in the world.
Well,
50 years earlier.
That's a great, it supports your point that printing money never, endlessly will lead you to that kind of situation where your standard of living goes down. And that's a great education because, just looking at the history, I see the British stock market go up, but you're saying there was terrible standard of living, there were problems with hyperinflation. And I do compare us to the British Empire because they had the reserve currency once and they lost it. So that's really good to know. Which leads me to the next question, because I don't know if you've seen this analysis by Raoul Pal, where he divided the S&P 500 by the Fed's balance sheet growth, and it's flat, right, in US dollar terms. So, so was the Venezuelan stock market recently in the hyperinflationary times they just had in local currency, just went straight up. So are we in the kind of period where the Federal Reserve just props up the stock market, and in local currency, it just goes up forever, and there's never really a big kind of correction? What are your thoughts?
Never a big correction? Oh, hallelujah, Elliot. Well, I've never seen that in history where things never go down. That would be fantastic. It certainly never happened in my investment career. I had plenty of mistakes and plenty of things go down. But your point is basically, yes, my experience and my observation is that all of this money printing it has to go somewhere. It takes a long time to build a bridge or a factory, but it's very easy to go online and you buy as much of anything as you want. And that's what's happening. Everybody has a lot of money in their pocket. There is a lot of money around, and it's going into financial assets. Will that last forever? It never has, but you say maybe it will. Maybe it will this time.
Well, I don't think it will. I'm just looking at the Venezuelan stock market, and it's just straight up in their local currency.
At times in other currencies, it's gone straight up in local currency, but you can't buy a loaf of bread.
That's true.
It doesn't do you much good.
Right. So if it doesn't outpace inflation, and even if it underperforms inflation, then it's kind of worthless. I hear what you're saying.
Well, for history shows that it's very clear. There have certainly been periods when stock markets in various countries have done extremely well, but it didn't make people rich. What really counts is making people a lot of money in an international currency so that you can go and buy a watch or a car or a loaf of bread or whatever it is you want to buy.
So then my other question is kind of related to the current debate that's raging right now, which is the inflation due to supply chain disruption in the United States transitory, and will it just go away as soon as the big deflationary pressures like automation, globalization, immigration, all that keeping labor costs down, will the deflationary trends kind of supersede this potentially transitory inflation?
Well, Washington says that this is transitory. And, if you believe the head of the central bank and the secretary of the treasury, then you don't have to worry. Everything is going to be great. Look out the window. Everything is going to be fantastic. No worries, no worries, no worries. I happen to be of a different view. First of all, the U.S. stock market has gone up, 10, 12 years without a serious problem, other than some short, gigantic disruptions, but nothing serious. That's never happened in American history. And maybe, Elliot, maybe it is different this time. Janet Yellen says, don't worry, we have solved the problems. We won't have problems, economic problems again. She's got degrees from 2 Ivy League universities, so maybe she knows what she's talking about. I happen to know she's wrong. We will have problems again, and when they come, it's going to be horrible. 2008, we had a problem because of too much debt. Elliot, since 2008, the debt everywhere has skyrocketed by gigantic amounts. So it would be my view that the next time we have a problem, it's going to be the worst in my lifetime, given that the debt is so, that may sound like some kind of wild statement, but look out the window. The debt is there. The debt goes higher every day. I know what it caused in 2008. It's got to be worse next time around. But Mrs. Yellen says, no, don't worry. It's not going to happen again. And Mr. Powell says the same thing.
Right, absolutely. So it's all in the government's books now, right? Because they've bailed out all the toxic debt, in the United States. So now it's on their balance sheet. Now they're going to have to deal with it. So how does this terrible event, the worst in your lifetime, kind of manifest itself? Is it that, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer? It's kind of interesting, right? How would it play out? Is it a hyperinflationary event where the cost of living goes up, no one can afford anything? How does that?
Well, hyperinflation eventually, of course, we may have hyperinflation. Britain ended with not hyper like Venezuela, but very serious, and the value of the currency went down 80% against the US dollar over a few decades. That's pretty serious stuff if you happen to be a British citizen. I doubt that we will end in hyperinflation quickly. That's usually towards the very, very end of a decline, of a long decline. Venezuela had been declining for a long time. Zimbabwe was in decline. Zimbabwe at one time was the richest country in the British Empire. Been a long way down since then. Mr. Mugabe learned how to ruin the country, and he did. It took him decades, but he totally ruined it, and it ended in wild inflation. I don't think we're going to have it that quickly in the U.S., even if we're going the way of Britain. Don't panic yet. But it doesn't mean we can't have serious inflation and a decline of the standard of living and a decline of the value of the currency, and we probably will. History is pretty clear. That's what happens.
Right. So, the Federal Reserve is going to prop it up as long as possible, because I think that's what governments have always tried to do. So do you think they will try to clamp down on yields from rising to prevent any sort of, deflationary scares?
Well, of course. These people don't understand much about the world. All they care about is keeping their job. In their minds, their position is keep my job, keep my job, keep my job. They don't care about your job. They don't care about me or my kids or their jobs. They want to keep their job. And the way they know to keep their job is to burn a lot of money, spend a lot of money, and keep it up and keep interest rates down. They will do their best. But what will happen, Elliot, is eventually the market will say, oh, wait a minute. We've seen this movie. We know how this ends. And the market will say, we're not going to play your game anymore. Then it gets out of the control of the central bank, and that's when you have serious bear markets. It will be the worst in my lifetime. Elliot, I'm older than you. It's going to be the worst in your lifetime, too. I don't say that with great pleasure. I just say I have to deal with facts, or, I'll be Zimbabwe.
Right. So are you seeing kind of the big obligations with Social Security and just, the big off-balance sheet obligations for all the kind of the retired baby boomers as being like the equivalent of wartime reparations that we have to pay that are impossible to pay? Is that kind of what you see, kind of like these big obligations kind of tipping us over the edge and people losing confidence in the dollar?
Social Security will be paid. You may not be able to buy very much with your Social Security, but you will be paid. In Russia, they still pay the Soviet obligations, retirement obligations, but it doesn't do you much good. So the question is that kind of default I cannot see that happening in the US. However, the value of the money is certainly going to continue to decline. As I said, the British pound went down 80% against the value of the US dollar, which replaced it as the world's reserve currency. I'm sure that the value of the US dollar is going to continue to decline. Everybody watching this knows that the dollar is not what it used to be. It depends on whether you're buying bread or gasoline or anything. It's not the same, and it continues to decline. And they're not on your side, Elliot. I told you, they want to keep their jobs.
Right.
Well, I don't like saying any of this, Elliot, by the way, except for the fact that I'm old. It's good to be old. It's good to be an old American in 2021. It's not good to be a young American in 2021.
Right. So there has to be some sort of way that young Americans can protect themselves, right? There has to be some way of just protecting wealth and maybe even doing well in a hyperinflationary environment or even in an inflationary environment. And would that be precious metals?
Well, there always have been people who come out of these things better off than they were before, and sometimes rich. People came out of the collapse in Germany in 1920s rich. Some people came out of the American Depression very rich in the 1930s. Most didn't, but if you get it right, of course, you can do very well. I own silver and gold. I plan to buy more. See, there's a little silver right there.
Nice.
And I plan to buy more sometime in the future. My timing is never very good, but I will definitely buy more of both, because before this is over, both are going to skyrocket. Mrs. Yellen and Mr. Powell say, no, don't worry about it. Leave gold and silver alone. You don't need it. You don't, that's antique. That's archaic. Well, I'm an old peasant, Elliot, and I know all of us old peasants know when things go wrong, we want to have a little silver over in the closet. We want to have a little gold under the bed, because we know that when things collapse, gold and silver will help you. It won't take care of it, will help you. So I am buying gold both, and I will buy more. I'm also buying commodity indexes, because by definition, if commodities go higher, that's inflation. I mean, if the price of rice goes up, that's inflation. So I own rice. I own agricultural commodities. I own all commodities through an index, because by definition, if they're going to drive up prices, those will benefit.
I hear that, and it makes sense. But then there's that argument that technology is deflationary.
Well, by all means, but Elliot, technology is going to give us electric cars, at least so I see in the press. But electric cars use 5 times as much copper as regular cars. That's technology, but you got to have something. You got to make this stuff out of something. Solar energy uses a lot of silver, whether we like it or not. I mean, solar energy is a gigantic and wonderful new technology, at least so I read, and if it happens, it's going to use a lot of silver.
How about food? Because I know you're a big agriculture bull, and I'm just thinking, well, technology is always improving. They throw away so many pounds of food every year. Will it truly have a sustained price increase, even though they can just get more and more yield with every generation?
I hope they can get more and more yields, but in the meantime, agriculture has been so horrible. The average age of farmers in America is 58. I mean, the highest rate of suicide in the UK is in agriculture. More people in America study public relations than study agriculture. Hooray, hooray. But somebody's got to produce this stuff. And the number of farmers in America has been declining for well over 100 years. We have many fewer farmers than we used to. That doesn't mean we don't have big times in American history when the price of agricultural goods goes through the roof. And maybe we won't. Maybe Mrs. Yellen is right. Don't worry. You don't have to worry about agriculture either. I've got Ivy League degrees. I'll take care of it. Don't worry. I hope she can. History shows we're going to have problems.
Okay. Makes sense.
By the way, the average age of farmers in Japan is 66. I can go on and on.
Right.
We're running out of farmers.
And that's why you're my favorite investor of all time. And I will say that because you have the cojones to buy things when they're in the basement, like the absolute floor, when no one else wants them. And that is, how you find an early stage investment. So just looking at things like right now, ever since the COVID bottom, just everything's popped. So let's say you just had nothing but cash and you were starting all over and had to create a new portfolio, and you're seeing everything kind of at cycle highs. How would you start building positions?
Well, as I see the world, bonds are clearly a bubble all over the world. Bonds have never been this high in the history of the world. So I don't think I would start with bonds unless there's a special situation. Bonds are short-term. I own Russian government bonds in rubles, but they're short-term and because of the high yield. Property in many places is becoming a bubble. If you go to New Zealand or Korea, I mean, there are many places in the world that are having property bubbles. Some parts of the U.S., not everywhere. There's still opportunities in the U.S. If you look at stocks, some stocks are beginning to form bubbles. I mean, Apple goes up every day. Tencent goes up every day. Samsung, some of these go up every day around the world, but many are not. So there's still, the stock market is not a overall bubble, not yet anyway. So if I were that person, I would certainly look at some stocks perhaps. I might buy a farm. If I could I might go to Zimbabwe and buy a farm. Probably not me, because I don't want to be a farmer, but there are great agricultural opportunities still out there. As I look at asset classes, the single cheapest is commodities. I mean, sugar is down 70% from its all-time high. Silver is down 50% from its all-time high. This is not a typo. Oil is down 50% from its all-time high. These are not bubbles. So the cheapest asset class I can see, commodities. I mean, copper is at an all-time high, but we explained before, perhaps maybe the part of the reason why. But most commodities are still down a lot.
Yeah,
I would start learning about commodities. By the way, commodities are simpler. It's a lot easier to analyze cotton. If you can figure out the supply and demand, you will understand cotton. I didn't say that was easy. I said it's simpler. It's simpler to understand cotton than it is to understand Toyota or Microsoft.
Well, that's what's tricky about some of these commodities, because even like silver, right? So there'll be a big investment demand flooding into it and the price will spike. But then the cure for high prices is high prices. The people flood the market with product. Everyone who buys it high will just get squeezed and it'll correct on them. Is that hard to watch out?
I didn't say it was easy. I said it was simpler. It's simpler to understand silver or copper or cotton than it is to understand 10 cent. At least certainly for me it is. I didn't say it was easy. I mean, there are millions of people every day trying to figure out what the prices of these things is going to be in the future. Yes, you are right. That's part of the problem or part of the situation.
Yeah. So that
maybe the answer is to watch the early stage investor, and you will find the answers to the problems.
Yeah, we get a lot of people that love these beaten down commodities. So yeah, no, I'm with you. Like uranium, right? Have you heard the argument for uranium where we need it? There's a supply crunch. The price has to go up to incentivize new production. Is that one that you're looking at? That's kind of interesting.
Well, I own uranium. Who knows? I make mistakes, plenty of mistakes, but I own uranium. If you read all the studies, everybody wants clean energy. Well, uranium is about as clean as you can get. But be careful, though, because if you don't treat it right, you have a huge disaster on your hands. But it's cleaner, it's cheaper, it's longer lasting. Uranium is a miracle, but you better be very careful. It's like many miracles. Be very, very careful.
That's right. Yeah, one big event, and you could have a 10-year bear market like we had after Fukushima, right?
You hope it's 10 years.
Well, yeah, but again, a lot of the bulls are saying the demand is so high, just based on the number of reactors that even if there is an event, they're going to need uranium. So that's just one.
Well, I own uranium. We'll see.
Yeah, exactly. So great. So then kind of to close, you said you'd buy silver in the future, or in precious metal, you buy more of it. Is that because you're waiting for a better entry point? And if so, are you expecting kind of like a big correction in risk assets, including gold and silver, that you can take advantage of?
Elliot, I am the world's worst market timer. I'm the single worst short-term trader in the world. I've been investing for decades, so I know that that's an accurate statement. Yes, I see corrections taking place. Maybe it's over for all I know. I'm not rushing out to buy yet. But I do know that in many places, India right now, they're having to sell a lot of gold and silver to survive. Many places, and India is the largest market for gold and silver in the world. So yes, lots of people who are having problems. Now, I don't know, but I am not buying gold and silver today, I don't think. You can ask me this afternoon. But I do plan to buy more sometime in the, I may get it wrong and I may buy it higher, but I do know before this is over, and history is very clear that when people lose confidence in governments and in money, they have always flocked to gold and silver.
Absolutely.
Maybe they won't this time, maybe it will be something else, but this old peasant has some over there and some over there, and I'm going to have more before it's over.
Great. And do you think the government is enjoying the narrative that blockchain like Bitcoin is going to replace gold because that kind of lowers the value of these safe haven assets and kind of like throws chaos into the system? Have you heard the argument that Bitcoin could replace gold?
Well, I didn't call gold and silver a safe haven. That was your word. I know it, in my experience, there's no such word as safe when you're talking about investments. That word may have a use in other things, but not in investing. Yeah, of course, there are many people who say that. My reaction, and I've never bought nor sold any cryptocurrency, and many have already disappeared, as you know. Hundreds have already gone to zero, and there are thousands of them apparently out there. Well, maybe governments want this to happen. I don't think governments pay that much attention to gold and silver. They're not smart enough to pay that much attention to gold and silver. A lot of people I know have made a lot of money in cryptocurrency. I mean, I wish I'd bought Bitcoin. Went from $1 to 50,000, 50, 60,000. You know, I wish I'd bought it. Of course, it's 40,000 today, but still, if I'd bought it at $10, I'd be quite happy right now. No, my concern or my view is if they become successful currencies, which the advocates say they will, governments will say, no, we don't want competition. They won't say it this way, but the facts are governments don't want competition and they don't want to lose their monopoly. Governments will make it illegal. They've done it throughout history, that they want to keep control. They want to keep the monopoly. Money is going to be on the computer. It already is in China. China, you can't take a taxi with money. You can't buy an ice cream with money. You have to use your computer money to do anything. Well, that's going to happen. The US is working on it. As I said, China's way ahead. It's happening everywhere. But Elliot, I don't think when the US dollar is on the computer, the government's going to say, okay, this is US, this is money. This is US money. But if you want to use something else, you can. Elliot, you can use something else if you want to. I think it's more likely the FBI is going to show up at your door and say, Elliot, we hear you've been using other money, and that's illegal. So,
yeah, I have the same question because there are thousands of these cryptocurrencies you can buy, and if the government comes out with just another cryptocurrency, is that just going to be one of 100 in your wallet? And why would you use that one, right, instead of the other ones? So,
well, the government's pretty clear, or at least historically, governments are pretty clear. They want control. I don't like that. No, of course not. I'd rather be able to use anything I want. But governments, Elliot, when it's all on the computer, they're going to call you up one day and say, Elliot, you've been drinking too much coffee this month. Cut back on your coffee. Cut back. Whatever it is you've been doing that they don't like. See, there's a beer. You're drinking a beer?
No, it's coffee.
Oh, okay. They're going to say, Elliot, you've been drinking too much coffee or beer or whatever it is this month. They'll know everything. They love that. Oh, they love that. I don't like it at all, but they've got the gun. They've got the guns. I don't have the guns.
Yeah, they're going to check everything. That's absolutely correct. But you're bullish China, and that's always a struggle for me because it's a communist country, right? And the last communist country that rivaled the United States with the USSR. We all know what happened to them, right? So are you bullish China, given that?
Well, I mean, China has been the most successful country in the world in the last 40 years. Whether you say they're communists, and they call themselves communists, but they're among the best capitalists in the world right now, Elliot.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
California is more communist than China is, and California is less successful than China is now. Oh, China has been and continues to be extraordinarily successful. Yeah, they call themselves communists, but Rome calls itself Christian too. There are lots of people who call themselves lots of things. Okay, let's even say they're communists. They have been extremely successful. Entrepreneurs and capitalists make a huge success in China, and that is going to continue. There will certainly be setbacks. America became the most successful country in the 20th century. Along the way, we had a horrible civil war. We had many depressions with a D. We had massacres in the streets. You could buy and sell congressmen. Well, you could still buy and sell congressmen, but they were cheap in those days. America was a mess. And many people would not invest in America. It was so unlawful. It was such a mess. But we became extremely successful. China is going to have many problems. They'll have bankruptcies. They already are having bankruptcies. One good thing about Chinese communists is they let people go bankrupt. In America, we don't let people fail. You can't fail, for goodness sakes. In Europe, you can't fail. Well, in China, they let you go bankrupt. They're letting people go bankrupt. People knock on the door and say, save us, save us, save us. And the Chinese communists say, go away, go away. You got to take care of yourself. So, yeah, there are many flaws. Don't get me wrong. There are many flaws, everywhere. But I am optimistic that China is going to continue to be a successful and extraordinary country, whether they call themselves communist or whatever they call themselves. China is the only country in world history that's had recurring periods of greatness. Rome was great once, Egypt was great once, Britain was great once, but China's been great 3 or 4 times. Total disaster 3 or 4 times and collapse, but for whatever reason, after a few decades or a few centuries, they rise to the top again. I'm not particularly keen on it. I'm just telling the facts. I'm not endorsing or criticizing. I'm certainly not a communist, and I know that communism doesn't work. Mr. Marx had a wonderful theory. Everybody loved it. Oh, it's a great theory. And many people tried it many times for a long time. Nobody wants to be a communist. Nobody wants to be a Marxist anymore. If they do, they want to be a rich Marxist. Everybody has learned about that, including the Chinese. Even the Chinese government says, oh, we are socialists with Chinese characteristics. Chinese characteristics means we want to get rich. We want everybody to have a very good standard of living. They have a stock exchange, they have a commodities exchange, they have a currency exchange, bond exchange. The Russian communists never had a stock market, never had any of that. The Chinese have it all in spades. Yeah, does that mean there won't be problems? No, there'll be many problems, just as we had problems.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So they're making excellent decisions, right? They're really smart leadership. So, and you're right, everyone, including the United States, is part capitalist, part communist at this point. So it's just a matter of the degree. You have to look at that. So
especially California.
Yeah,
you live in California. My friends who live in California. Yeah, many people are leaving California because, well, I'll leave that to another discussion, another time.
No, they are. You're right. Absolutely. Socialism, again, varying degrees of socialism all over the world. So I'm not going to pick on China for that. Excellent. Well, do you have anything else you want to share with people?
Well, I just want to make sure I clarified. Bullish on China, that usually means the stock market. I do own Chinese shares. I am buying Chinese shares, but that does not mean that the Chinese stock market can't have bear markets, and it will have bear markets. All I'm suggesting to you is that the Chinese country is in a period of several decades where it will continue to improve and get better. So I'm optimistic about the future of China. That the word bullish usually has different connotations.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And so where can people go to learn more from you and get some sage advice and wisdom?
I don't have anything to sell. I've written a few books. You can buy my books, my most recent books. Or I have three bestsellers in Japan, but they're all in Japanese. I don't even know what they say. I can't read them myself. I know what they're supposed to say, but I have no idea what they say. Korea, I've got a couple of bestsellers. Korea, China, but I can't read them myself. I hope they say what they're supposed to say.
All right, well, we'll Google Jim Rogers and just find the years of advice and knowledge and everything that you've shared.
Elliot, I want to repeat you. I make plenty of mistakes. Don't think I don't make mistakes. You want me to tell you about my first wife, Elliot? What a mistake that was. Oh, my God.
You don't have to. That's fine. So anyway, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Let's do it again.
This discussion is for informational purposes only. Nothing in this discussion should be taken as investment advice. Guests are not compensated for their appearance. Do not base any investment decisions on the information presented.